devaluing the city as it exists in order to open up the possibility for create. I mean, basically, it's what, I mean, if anybody's in business school, this is what they teach you, right? You have to create a market and then provide the product, so you have to buy it. I think one of my friends was here told me this. So the market was created. I mean, I was just in Heliopolis 2 days ago, and I saw 5 villas that were demolished in the last 2-3 weeks. It's a very big question. Why are these structures, which are of much superior architectural standards, much superior, I mean, and they have historical value, why are they being demolished? And why aren't the people paying multi-million dollars for this cookie-cutter ugliness, not trying to occupy those houses? That has a legal dimension, it has a cultural dimension, it has a class dimension. So that's important. So how are these values constructed, and is there a system, or is it arbitrary? I think I'm trying to suggest that it's quite arbitrary. But the value isn't only in relationship to the existing built environment, but also this in relationship to agricultural land. And this is where the informal comes in. Because so much state money has been funneled into this, but so little of it actually benefits the majority of the population. People still need to expand and build, and agricultural land has become 1/10 the price if it's urban. If it's farmed. So it's worth 10 times more if urbanized. So it's an obvious direction for people who are being left out of all this process to expand the city. So again, I'm just trying to sort of highlight a few different issues: land value, agricultural land, and then the existing city's value are important sort of contexts for this. And then there's the cultural values. I think what we're witnessing is, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the soap opera from the 90s, but Layali al-Hilmiya. We're kind of having a Layali al-Hilmiya complex where everybody wants, it depicts this, different stratas in society, but, the ones that people kind of admire, the strata that's represented that people admire or they kind of want to be part of are, the bourgeois, middle class, with the beautiful gilded furniture and the big villa with a sweeping stair. And I think over, the last 25, 30 years, this has become the desirable thing. This is, so, whether you're part of that strata or you're trying to you're aspiring to be part of that, this is the image. And with time, it has become kind of a cartoon of itself. But there is a cultural kind of association there that was propagated throughout media, in the last 25 years or so, that made also this desirable. And then those who can't afford this is why you see in an informal area, for example, people go in the extra mile to add these lavish columns and whatever. It's because, there's a standard somewhere that they're trying to aspire to. And then my final point, because I don't want to go on much longer, is going back to this idea of kind of a colonial parallels. I think cities need to grow, they need to expand, and their patterns will have to respond to both local contexts, but also global contexts. I mean, cities exist not in vacuums, right? So you have to, they're not going to be all copies of each other, or they shouldn't be all copies of each other across the globe. But we shouldn't fetishize sort of an idea of a localized version of whatever. There needs to be a balance between the two. So naturally, in different eras, we'll have different urban patterns. So obviously, this is going to happen. But to say that these developments are today's version of, say, downtown or Heliopolis from 100 years ago is missing the point. There's a much more, I think I can make a case that this is much closer to colonial urban expansion than it is to those previous contexts within Cairo, like Heliopolis or downtown. And again, the walls, going back to the issue of walls, which, in colonial contexts, segregation and walls were important, and they manifested sometimes in invisible ways, so social and legal segregation. This is what we're seeing here. And I think it's, I tried to make a point in an article recently that this is a reflection of basically the state's failure at achieving social justice, where then the moneyed minority feels the need to protect itself from, all these subhuman or elite people, which is a very colonial perspective. The middle class for the last 30 years, and a lot of the values that have become attached with the class are actually continuations of colonial values. You know, if you sort of try to be what's the expression, sort of blend in and not say too much in certain salons and hear what people have to say to each other, it's really sometimes shocking what Egyptians say about other Egyptians who are not of their class. And I don't think the awareness of the colonial connection is there, but that's what it is to me, to my reading at least. And I think this.
Stand up if people want me to.
Okay, do you want to come on?
Well, I think we'll have any trouble hearing unless we stand in. Okay, I mean, I feel like so much of interest has already been said, so I'm struggling to marshal my remarks and respond to what's been said. My interest and my focus in a master's thesis and also in a feature article that grew out of that has been on representations of Cairo and discourse about the city. And I've got an interest in culture and literature. And one of the interesting things in the late Mubarak era was there was a great focus on the Ashwayet, on the informal neighborhoods. At times very sensationalistic and voyeuristic depiction of these neighborhoods, but taking them as emblematic of the extreme marginalization of most Egyptians under the late Mubarak regime. So there was a whole sort of genre of films and novels written about the shocking poverty and criminality and social pressure of these neighborhoods, which of course was an exaggeration, but spoke to how people thought they were emblematic of what Egyptians were suffering under Mubarak. At the same time, and I think it's important, and we've all touched upon this a bit, there's this, you can't talk about the Ashwayet or the gated communities or the historic downtown separately. They all, the value that's assigned to each and the policies that affect each are interconnected. At the same time, the depictions of the new gated communities in arts and culture were almost absent. There were photography was probably the medium that focused on them the most. But in film and literature, there were some things about Heliopolis and Nasser City, but the really, really new developments were almost imaginatively gated. Nobody could quite access them yet, and very little has been written about them. There is a novel out now called Utopia, which is about a gated community on the North Coast, a sort of dystopian view of this gated community where the upper class leads this utterly degenerate life, and rabble interlopers are shot by helicopters as they try to come onto the beach. But what struck me at the time, and I did some of my research 2 or 3 years ago, was these two extremes that sort of defined the urban landscape of Cairo, and what looked like the threat of a sort of absence of a center. You know, the sort of physical degradation of downtown, the social divide growing, and the possibility that Cairo could end up being a city without a very strong center, with a sort of lack at its core. Now, what happened a year ago on January 25th, I think that vacuum was filled in a really dramatic way. And we saw this return to the center, and the protesters actually acting out a very ideal vision of civic participation, of civic values, of ownership of public space that was, and it could only take place in the classic traditional center, the late 19th century, early 20th century center of the city. It couldn't have taken place in the gated communities. It also could not have taken place in the informal neighborhoods, which built according to the maximization of space and of economic investment, of completely informal investment, have no public squares, no parks, no meeting places where that kind of a gathering could have taken place. The question for me now is, there was this vision, I think, of refinding the center of the city that took place during the protests, but that has not been realized, just as almost all the demands and hopes of the revolution have so far not been realized. And the question is how to find that center, what practically to do, because as you say, Central Cairo has been devalued, not just imaginatively, but through policy and legally and financially. It has been degraded. And there's been incredible creative, lively appropriations of public space in the past year, graffiti, protests, election campaigning, public art festivals, but there's been no real improvement in the management of the city. And, you know, elitist and ridiculous as the aspirations of a lot of the people and the certainly marketing campaigns of these cities may be, I don't think we can completely dismiss the feeling of people who think that there's something that's not working in the city anymore, who are uncomfortable with what they see as a degradation of the urban environment. And I think this comes from the complete absence of a trusted, fair, reasonable state that can act as an intermediary and a regulator and between the interests of citizens. And this leads to an environment in which people have to fight for space in ways that are sometimes very aggressive and not civic. And also, of course, it leads to, you know, actions that damage the fabric of the city, that damage everybody's interests. So for me, the question is, you know, how can you find the center to Cairo? How can you help develop that? There's been no devolution of municipal authority to the city. There's been no accountability yet for how resources are spent from one neighborhood to another. I think these are the questions looking forward. I think, unfortunately, the new cities are there to stay, more or less. Maybe the government policy can be, like you say, stopped, taken no further. And maybe this policy of complete denial over what the city really consists of and who lives in it and what it looks like can be changed. But the question for me is how does Cairo save and improve and maintain its center? Thank you.